Noswaith dda chi. Good evening to you all. You've just joined us live. You're listening to the live webinar on can the social economy save us? Noswaith dda chi, Una oes yn siarad, rwy'n rhan o'r tîm ymarfer da Swyddfa Chwilio Cymru. Rwy'n croesawu chi i'r gweminar, mae'r gweminar a all'r economi cymdeithasol eich achub. Cwbl o bethau dwi am siarad â chi cyn bod ni'n dechrau y gweminar yn fyw. Ac mae croeso cynnes i chi roi ateb unrhyw gwestiwn ydych chi moyn rhwng y webinar. Y ffordd i wneud yw trwy Mentimeter. Now, you're all very welcome to post any questions you like, anytime you like, throughout the course of this next 40 minutes. The way to do it is mentimeter.com. As long as you've got Wi-Fi, if you can access that, go to mentimeter.com, and I'm going to give you a code now. And the code is, Miss Sarah?
700963.
700963. I'll repeat that. 706903.
700963.
I think they heard that. Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. I didn't have that on my script. Sorry about that. So this webinar is going to be for 40 minutes. So what's going to happen? Derek's going to ask some questions to Chris. Anytime something pops in your head, you can pop it throughout that Mentimeter on the add your comments on there, and they'll come live on the screen. The other thing I want to mention, some people don't like using Mentimeter, so I'll give you another couple of options. You can email it. There's an email address, and that's good.practice@audit.wales. Or if you happen to have a Gmail account, you can log on live onto YouTube and chat on the Google chat if you want to. We'll pick up those three ways. The two main ways usually are either the good.practice@audit.wales or the Mentimeter. So I'm going to step away from the screen now and hand you over to Derek, who's going to chair the evening. I really hope you have a lovely time. And Chris, I hope you enjoy sharing all the knowledge that you've learned. Thank you very much. I'm going to step away now.
Thank you, Una. Thank you. Great. So welcome, everybody. I'm Derek Walker. I'm Chief Executive of the Wales Co-operative Centre, and this is
Chris Bolton from Wales Audit Office.
The question before us is, can the social economy save us? Chris has undertaken a Winston Churchill Fellowship in the last 12 months. And what we want to do today is for Chris to share the learning from his travels and that fellowship. He'll tell you a little bit more in a minute about what the Winston Churchill Fellowship is. But the idea is for us to hear that learning, and for organisations like mine that already work in the social economy in Wales to understand what lessons there are from where you've been and how they might be applied to Wales, but also for those organisations who are interested in this agenda to come together and have a conversation about what more we can do. So there is, as Una has said, there's an opportunity for questions later on. We're going to go through a few questions to get as much information from Chris as possible about what he's learned, and then we'll open it up to a wider discussion. And as we're both passionate about co-ops, we'll try and not be anorak sitting here just chatting between ourselves, and make it as relevant to as everyone else as possible. So, Chris, tell us about the Winston Churchill Fellowship and what it is.
Just a brief explanation. You can get plenty online, but it was set up in 1965 following his death. Explicit purpose of travelling outside the UK to go and learn. And they've got this lovely expression that says, travel to learn, return to inspire. And that's basically what they do. Ideas around international connections, understanding other people, which is possibly more relevant now than perhaps it was, is always relevant. And they sponsor about 150 people a year. Basically, they give you the money to literally travel anywhere around the globe, and that's what people do. Where there are some conditions, they set up some criteria, and they're largely around the issues that are faced in society. So there's a lot around homelessness, prison reform, health is a big area, and a lot about the economy. And that's the area I applied to around the economy. They team up with some partners, so people like the Rank Foundation, who are a co-sponsor of this fellowship that they gave me last year. And there is a Welsh Association of Churchill Fellows. There's one of them in the room. And there are a few people around. But there's a website as well, and there's a ton of information. They reopen the awards for next year in May, so people can have a look, and it's open to any UK citizen to have a go. and they'll pay for you to travel for up to 8 weeks.
Great. So it's a good opportunity to promote that, because I think in the last time there were just 5 from Wales, weren't there?
Yeah.
And so we're slightly below what we would perhaps deserve due to our population. So encouraging more people to apply.
Yeah.
It was interesting. I thought that 2 people from those 5 were doing it on co-op related issues.
Yeah.
2 people were doing it on fishing and marine type things, and there was another one on social care. So it would be good to see more people taking up that scheme in future. So what was your topic and why did you choose it?
Right, bear with me with this. This is under 100 characters you apply, and you have to get into 100 characters the essence of what you're doing. And I had a very good coach who was saying, do it, because I tried in the past and didn't get through.
Right.
So my coach, who's sitting in the room, said, get this right, you've got to go big or go home.
Right.
And it was, so my coach and my words were profitability and social good. So big words in there. And just I wanted to learn from large-scale cooperatives in the USA and Basque Country. And that was in under 100 characters. And I was going for what's going to grab these, because they get thousands of applications. Very kind of big sort of concept in what I was saying I was going to do. But it was driven by the idea of, I work in the Wales Audit Office. I look across what's happening in Wales, and you see the impact of the financial crisis of 2018 and continued austerity happening across public services. You see increasing demand coming in on what's going on, and the notion of this can't continue, is that what's happening in Wales, we're not going to sustain this for the future. Is there another way? We can probably do better. That was what was sort of driving my ideas around it. And the notion of, amongst the detail I put below that, saying, is there an economic model that would help Wales? And I came to this quite naively. I wasn't a co-op person.
Right.
I was interested, and the idea of the social economy, I put this forward to them and said, this is what I'm interested in. And back to that thing, go big or go home. I said, I want to go and look at big things, big successful things that we might be able to draw something from and bring back to Wales. So I pitched really big around Ocean Spray, who are a big producer co-op in New England and then across the rest of England, $2.5 billion turnover. So that's quite big. That's as big as Admiral or Iceland. Yeah. So that was the one area. The other one was around in the USA was the Maine lobster fishery. There was a bit of bias from my background in here, but they're big. They're $1.5 billion, but employ enormous numbers of people. In terms of the Maine economy, a massive player. But what was interesting amongst those is co-management, and that fitted in very well with, I think, the management of a common resource and how that fits around the ideas of co-production and how people work with regulators and service users and experts to get a better result. And then almost, you can't do any of this with, you cannot afford, if you're going to go big, you've got to mention the Basque Country. So I put that in, and that was my big one, saying I've got to go to the Basque Country where this is happening. And that's where I went, and that's what I pitched. And I say around it, and they said, yeah, that sounds all right, off you go. And then panic struck me, thinking, oh my goodness, what have I just done? And then you sort of have to work out, who am I going to see and what's going to happen.
And how easy did you find it to meet people and speak to these co-ops and find out things?
It varied. There's Calvin, Saviour Calvin, kind of put me in touch with people in the Basque Country, and things came from that. But there are people like, you kind of just pull on everyone you know.
Yes.
And that sort of is, there are people who rescue you. And it's astonishing how welcoming and helpful people are. You pick up the phone to somebody you've never met, and they say, oh, yeah, I can put you in touch with so-and-so.
Yes.
So it's and I think there's something about that big idea about what you want, and with a big idea that's got a good purpose, people kind of hook onto that.
Well, we found the same back in 2012, International Year of Co-ops. I went to the Basque Country, and it was very straightforward actually to get information and to meet people. People were very open, and it was, very much in the spirit of cooperatives to share information and best practice and so forth. So that's good to hear.
Well, yeah, it's one of the key principles of cooperatives.
Yeah. So what did you learn? What was the main things that you learned, Chris?
Oh, okay, here we go. 8 weeks in 30 seconds.
Yes.
I've written a report. I've tried to distill this down. This is a huge, complex area, as you know. And I sat down afterwards, and I said, right, what have I sat down, put everything aside, and distill all this information into what can be useful? And I've done enough around sort of seeing things like, you know, management recipe books come out saying follow these steps and you get instant results, to know this doesn't work. And there's a massive caveat of it saying these are things I think are common features that existed amongst all of these organisations, that existed at different levels, but they were all sort of present, that led to something. If I can explain some of them, but if I rattle through the list, the big one was heart, that people really believed in what they did, and that seems really obvious to say, but you see that in action. And I go to Guriak, and heart is there. With Rosa at Bora Bora, I met, and you see that it's all about, they believe totally, they're driven. The other bit is saying all these organisations had a very clear compass that points the direction, and they stick to it, and that is where we're going. So
everyone's aligned, they know where they're going.
Aligned. I mean, and to talk about the lobster people, the compass steers these 3,000 fishermen who operate over 5,000 miles of coast, completely disconnected. Whereas a compass is a metaphor, isn't it? For fishermen, the compass that steers them is that we are protecting this resource for our grandchildren.
Wow, what a link to the Future Generations Act.
But it's that. So there's compass. So there's that heart. There's the compass. There's something else around all these organisations about connectivity. You see how they connect up and things. These are not structural things generally. There are lots of social bonds that hold things together, that people share information between organisations and as an ecosystem. So those three are really important. There's one about a laser sharp focus on the future. So you go to people like Mondragon Team Academy, and as a university, they are developing courses. The entrepreneurs of the future are popping out of it, and that laser sharp focus on the future is really common.
Tell us a little bit more about that, because there's a few academics in the room. The academy and how it works, and how you get people.
They're not the two people from it. They're not yet in the room, but you'll see them tomorrow.
They can watch online later.
The way I interpret that you've got Mondragon, huge cooperative, over 100 cooperative businesses sitting there between 1957 and the mid 80s. Most of them had formed, and where are the next ones coming from? And you've got someone like Mondragon University sets up this leadership, innovation, and entrepreneurship course. Teams of 15 people form a business, and
a real business
that's going to make money. That they taught some business skills, but it's about making money. And as I think, as a complex, it's what emerges from a very complex environment. You can sit back, and if I'd imagine Mondragon do this and go, what's popping up? Which are the businesses that might serve us in the future? But regardless of none serve Mondragon, what they're doing out into society, there are people with these core skills. I think, if these people were emerging in Wales, I suspect the Wales Co-op Centre would be running off and lassoing them. And
absolutely. But what we get in Wales probably is a system where people will leave school. It was the case in my day 25 years ago, where you probably didn't know what a cooperative was, whereas they're coming out here having a very good idea of what a cooperative is, and possibly seeing it as the default option if they wanted to set up a business in future potentially.
I'm sorry, looking at people. I think there's a notion as well around the schooling in the Basque Country. Icastola, the schools, there are cooperative schools. People come out of school, whether it's into university or to the workplace, immersed in a cooperative experience. So it's not alien to you. And I think there's a really strong part of that. And that, whether that's a future, that's the future is being embedded from 3 years old.
Would be interested to compare that to England, where there are hundreds, maybe even thousands of co-op schools in operation, and they've been a response to the academy programme in England. We don't have any in Wales, but they're run on cooperative values and principles, and those sorts of lessons could be applied to the Welsh system nonetheless within the state sector, rather than in the way that they've done it in England.
I agree, and I think one of the other key things, or linking to one of the areas, I think what we need to do about it is there's an issue of power.
Right.
That within systems where education is controlled, cooperative schools are controlled by the people who are in that area. Yes, we have governing bodies, but actually this is another level of power shift into what co-production is talking about. And I think we need to, how that moves will be quite interesting. So the one thing I need to just say about my key messages was money.
Right.
The dirty word. You know, nobody talks about money in Wales, but we probably need to. That actually all of the organisations that make money, and I sat in the Global Social Economy Forum conference with almost 1,700 other people, and the president of Mondragon's bank said we wouldn't be here if money wasn't being financially stable was part of what we do. So there'd be no Mondragon if we weren't serious about we've got to have enough money to survive, and so it's not about making, you know, being the next Google or anything. It's about that money.
These are businesses. They need to make a profit in order to carry on. Absolutely.
And so whether there's an issue of financial competency within the social economy, that people who are in that environment, how we manage money, and it's got to be enough to keep us going in that direction, because if we haven't got enough, what we're doing doesn't survive.
Yeah, and possibly being on the other side, what you often get having contracts with public services and government is even if you bid for a contract, our organisation has bid for contracts in the past, there isn't the possibility to make any surplus. You have to account for all your costs, and they will only pay for you for those things that you've spent, even though you exceed your objectives and so forth. Understandably, from a public sector point of view, which wants to, spend every penny on what it's delivering, but those contracts often don't allow, particularly third sector organisations, to make any sort of surplus when they're bidding for that.
Which is Andy Middleton's in the room. We've had this kind of conversation in the past, that the notion of business needs to be business.
Yes.
And I think back to the days when I was working in the environment sector, the contractors with Welsh Water, if we both win, we both win.
Yes.
It's not an adversarial. You can't. People need to make enough.
Yes, and you allow these organisations to be much more independent then, and to go off and do all sorts of other things without being under the control of the public sector potentially.
One organisation, Grupo Beggy, focus on disability, getting people with disability into the workplace. They were connected they were a not-for-profit, very connected to government and private public sector grants. They moved away from that section because our mission was about people with disability within the workplace. We cannot do the things we need to do. They moved to the private sector, became for-profit, made enough money. It was 60,000, but 60,000 went into their foundation, and they were then using that to amplify and do things that were more effective around what their mission was. And that sort of money, that was a very interesting, we're using money to further our mission, and it moves away from a sort of dependency on other people deciding how we use this money.
Yes,
even if we can be the most efficient organisation in the world, and we'll just have the surplus taken off us. Well, kind of okay. Yeah,
that makes organisations vulnerable, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Chris, apparently size matters too. Tell us about that.
I think. Oh, right. Okay, this is an interesting question. I'm struggling with how to. Have you seen that image of there's a shoal of fish swimming along?
Yeah.
Being chased, and there's a big shark coming behind them. And then suddenly in the next image, the fish have formed into the shape of a big fish, and are bigger than the shark, and the shark's now running away.
Yes.
And I think amongst small organisations, being large gives you a certain sort of advantage. And we've seen some of this in Wales, something like, I think there's Cwmni Bro up in Blaenau 13 small organisations that on their own aren't don't find it difficult, but actually by coming together, they've now got things like local authorities talking to them about, how can we do some work with you? And I think that size, and I think it's not so much the cooperative requirement of autonomy and independence. They're all autonomous and independent, but together they're stronger. And whether it's size or whether it's connectiveness, I'm grappling with the phrase, but how you get that interconnectedness and achieve that size, because procurement is the big area. And we were with some people this morning, said we want to do some procurement, but we're not big enough.
Yeah.
People
don't have the track record. Whatever.
Yeah. So
the
how do we get to that position? I mean, people wouldn't flinch at contracting with Mondragon because they're huge and they've got all of that stuff.
Yes.
But I expect for Rosa in Bilbao, your small cooperatives will struggle on those because they're small, and if someone wants to, whether it's public sector, private sector, will go for the big organisation, and how we get around some of that. And that was where my size matters. So the point comes from.
Well, I remember when we went this delegation a few years ago, a number of the cooperatives in Mondragon had put in some money each to set up a social care cooperative, offering social care in a residential setting. And so they had the backing of the business with the backing of 3 other big businesses or more to get off the ground. They had access to finance, they had access to expertise, and that's hopefully sprung up and flourished ever since. But that ecosystem and that connectivity has enabled other things, that cooperation amongst cooperatives, which I think we've really struggled with here in Wales.
And tomorrow, Fred will be talking about how that cooperation between us is how you get that going and how you make that work. Yeah.
So how do you apply this to Wales, Chris?
Oh, easy. Right. Okay. I think when I was looking at this, some of the technical things you can do.
Yeah.
It is perhaps is my naivety, but the notion of a Mondragon team academy in Wales. So amongst the universities, having a course where you put groups of 15 people together to say form a business. And you'll get a degree at the end of it, but we're watching this. That technically doesn't feel like an impossible thing to do.
No. Well, I mean, too few. Fortunately, Cardiff University is represented here today, and they do a bit.
Yeah.
My experience is some universities dip their toe in the water and then they stop doing it. But it would be great to see more of it. And Sarah's here. Sarah teaches on a course in the university. And I think that I'm right in saying when you taught on the course, you did lots of different modules, you did 1 or 2 sessions on cooperatives, but actually when the students came to do the exams at the end of the year, a good deal of them chose the cooperative.
chose to do cooperatives, and they were very, very enthused about it, which is fantastic.
So there's that interest.
So enthused, there's an interest there that we need to definitely capture.
Those technical. I think there are technical things around procurement, but I also think there are emotional things around this. Right. And technical, fine. Emotional stuff needs a bit more. And the bit about, say, some of the procurement and the emotional stuff is the power that rests with it. That I was with Bron Lloyd recently and talking about how they tried to create the cooperative housing in Newport, and she was saying that for housing officers, you've gone to school. You've gone to college, you've built your career up as being a housing officer that does this particular job, which is about people in housing being sort of dependent on you. Suddenly you're building an environment where these people are no longer dependent on you. And there's a big power shift that goes on there. And this is about the whole co-production element. And how do we tackle that? Because it's the thing about build the competency of these people to run a cooperative or social business.
But others have got to let go on the other side.
Someone's got to let go. And I think there's things amongst that we need to think about how we tackle them. And one of the ways I was thinking about that stuff, it's an emotional behaviour change type of thing. And we have tons of people in our universities who are really clever around this. So Bangor University had a Centre for Behaviour Change. Aberystwyth University have got some behaviour change people. How about applying some of that behaviour change psychology into that environment? Because it's a shift that is going to come from the heart as much as what people think about it.
Yes, we've been working a bit in this area around direct payments. So people can receive direct payments, but in Wales for their care and decide on how that care is delivered and who delivers it. But the take-up in Wales of people taking direct payments is much, much lower, much lower than it is in England. And there's a complexity to this, all sorts of reasons for that. Sometimes I think there's been a reluctance on public bodies to pass this over for the right reasons, because they didn't want to land people with being employers potentially and having the responsibility of managing the money when they may have other things to do. So we've looked at how cooperatives could play a role in that as a sort of middle ground in supporting people to come together to manage their direct payments and have control of them without, just landing on one person potentially as an individual.
So perhaps the little fish, and some of the little fish joining together to be a bigger fish.
Exactly that.
It's the other thing. So what do we do about it? I was thinking about is that the whole world of this behaviour around how do we operate is a complex system, and that linear, straightforward, do this will happen probably isn't going to work. And I was talking to Dave Snowden, I worked with in Bangor, and he says, "Well, you've just got to manage for emergence." And the idea is you've got to, within this complex environment, what emerges. And I think Mondragon Team Academy is a really interesting example of that. You're watching for what's emerging, but you manage it. And the idea of what's going on in that environment, they need to be small local things that matter to people, safe to fail. So if they don't work, that's okay. But what you learn from them, and the ones that do work, you amplify. The ones you don't, that's okay. We've learned something. You dampen them down a bit and take the learning back in, and a structured approach to managing for emergence around this.
Right. Yeah.
And I think
to go where the energy is almost.
Yeah.
If
So
things are emerging, make that happen, support it rather than having a big sort of system to try and work your way through it.
yeah, and so interesting people like Charlotte Goldsworthy from Port Talbot. Charlotte goes on about where our greatest entrepreneurs, they're in Park Prison. Right. This is a bit of extreme, but actually there are people within that environment who might be really interesting. Perhaps they're aligned in the wrong direction, but actually there are certain skill sets and thinking about actually when those people come out of prison, things like what was the bras thing? Behind bras. So that was it. So there were people, they were women within the sort of within the prison system who were creating lingerie. I bet that's the first time I've used that in a Wales order. We're manufacturing clothing, and so they were using skills that took them back out into the workplace and contributed to society. So
yeah, and you think there's something around emotional confidence here as well that we're lacking, perhaps? Or you've seen in plentiful elsewhere? I
mean, there's no lack of, some of it's about the emotional confidence about I'm part of a cooperative, I'm part of a social enterprise, I have nothing to fear. Say, go to meet the people from Mondragon Team Academy, these people have nothing to fear. They fear nothing. And it's that confidence of what we do in the world. And I think there was another example from what Bron Lloyd told me about the work on the cooperative housing, that people were going to do it. They'd almost signed up, and they said, I've been to talk to the family and friends, and we don't think we will. It sounds like a bit of a cult.
Right.
And that sort of
a perception
where this, and the notion of what stories do we tell about cooperatives, and that is for lots of people, it's still your blue co-op card.
Yes.
And it's no more than that.
Yes.
And where are the stories we tell about our cooperatives, our social enterprises, and what they're doing, and that how that gets. These aren't second choice. This is the first choice.
Yes.
Why aren't kids leaving school saying, actually, I want to go and work for a cooperative insurance agency or a cooperative organisation that provides insurance for cars and homes, rather than a big company that sort of has buildings in Cardiff? Because they're ultimately doing the same product at the end of it, but with a different social benefit. Yeah,
I mean, this is a big thing. If working for the Wales Co-operative Centre, if you ever get in a taxi and they ask where you work, and I say the Wales Co-operative Centre, people just automatically think of the co-op shop, or the funeral parlour. Automatically, there's a big awareness about that. But applying it as a business model in other areas, there's a very low awareness. But we've also, as you've said, I think, gone through this phase, perhaps in terms of public services, when people were still looking at how public services are delivered and mutual models and so forth. But also in the private sector, that the co-op model is seen as you said, a second best option, or a response to failure almost. Nothing else works. Let's try a co-op. Rather than, if we want an inclusive economy, if we want to share our wealth, if we want people to be aligned and involved and having a say in how their employment is, then you should look as a co-op first of all.
Yeah, and that I can't quite get in my head, why is that? Where does that come from? And there's something back in it. I mean, something's happened within the stories we tell ourselves about co-ops. Why aren't they up there? Why aren't they where, like it is within the Basque Country, that is a badge? It's a solid, real, proper job to be part of. And the social economy, well, it's about we work in areas that we do good, and that's what do we.
Did you see examples of how these stories are told within the different regions that you visited, and anything we can learn from there?
Go when with Cola Bora Bora to the Bilbao Rocks to that event, we walked in and they were as 8 small cooperatives that had formed, telling their story, and it was like being you're in a rock venue, but it was almost like it wasn't like some dusty church hall where someone stands up. there was the fire that was there, and that was people who were impassioned about what they believed, what they were doing, and that was different to what I see in perhaps going to some of our sort of things like that, which are a bit flat and I wonder what we telling about people. It was almost these young people, you know. Well, it attracts me as a cooperative brewery, with the notion of, you know, someone forms a brewery, I was instantly, and then someone, all of the other ones. There's something about.
There's something runs quite deep here, isn't there? Not easily resolved. I mean, I've seen co-ops, really successful co-ops. They've won Co-op of the Year, Social Enterprise of the Year, UK wide, all this kind of stuff. And well, not necessarily those ones, but they won't. Some of them will not mention it in literature and so forth, because they think actually when we are bidding for work, it's going to be seen like, well, there's maybe a cult there. No one's ever going to take a decision. You know, people will not want to do business with us because we're a co-op. There is this sort of sense within the sector, not just those from outside.
And then other measures of productivity, quality, all of those play a completely different other story. There's I don't know, there's a disconnect of facts don't match up some of the perception.
Yes, yeah.
And I don't know what, so that stories that we tell ourselves about it, and we can put out press releases and that, but actually the stories of what this means, people believe people telling them about it. So some of these people who are doing it, perhaps we should be getting more of these people out into the world to say, Suma are worth, when you look at how in Suma talk about what they do, and it's about decent jobs, and we believe in it, and that's why we're here. And
at a pretty reasonable scale too.
Yeah. Well, the notion of within the Basque Country, how much better people are who work in the social economy and the cooperatives than they are in other parts of Spain. That's quite a strong message.
Yes. What other things stand in our way, Chris? What other thoughts do you have on that?
I think, I mean, the notion of the power shift, some of the emotional conflict. I think some of the structural things about we've got connectivity, the managing for connectivity. We have lots of linking sort of success, some of those successful organisations to innovation, what they did. One of my sort of observations is people are very, the connections around innovation, and so things like InnoBasque and other people connect up those. Possibly in Wales, we've got lots of people doing really good stuff, but some of it doesn't connect like it should. And I say that manage for connectivity, and how we do that. We had some work done on what we did as the good practice team in the audit office, and the people who came in from Hull University looked at us and said, right, you're big enough, you don't need to be any bigger. What you need to do is it's a relationship process, and you need to be building those relationships. They're weak links, strong links, but actually when it matters, those links are formed, and you have those connections to get things going. So that how we do that is an organic sort of process.
When we came back from the Basque Country 6 years ago, this cooperation amongst cooperatives was a big theme. How do we support co-ops to come together to support each other? And there's been some success with that, but it's been difficult. You know, organisations working in completely different sectors, not really seeing much. Some of them not seeing much of a connection there, and others just needing someone to facilitate it. So I think there's definitely something in trying to do more about the awareness and bringing people together to generate something that has its own momentum there.
I think the private sector comparison of that was I threw my things like my Twitter feed and other things. It's always the Cardiff Business Club, or these people constantly pushing,
always coming together,
their get-togethers.
Need something for co-ops.
And that sort of, and some of it's quite a lot of it's social. And do we sort of, is there that, and they have quite a lot of fun. And is there the notion of actually, we can have a bit of fun on some of these things, that perhaps that's, you know,
a bit too serious.
And especially if there's a sort of cooperative beer making place, as it is.
Yeah, that would help with the fun, wouldn't it?
It would, yes.
What about the innovation? Finally, before we get to your sort of key messages, one thing I was struck by was how they invest. You know, in Basque Country in particular, Mondragon invested in innovation. So we visited a washing machine factory that at the time we're thinking, well, we can't compete with other parts of the world, but actually we've got skilled people, and the important thing here is to create jobs for the members of the co-op. It's not that we create washing machines, it's the fact that we've got a membership here that we want to create good jobs. And they were investing in innovation. There were lots of different innovation agencies scattered around the Basque Country, but also they were looking to products all around the world that they could build in the factory to be the European plant of another business and so forth. Did you come across much of this on your travels?
Well, yes. I mean, the short answer. I mean, go out. I mean, I'll go to the States and come back. I mean, people like Ocean Spray caught a massive, fruit, berries. You've got fruit. What can you do with a berry? And being the size they were,
Juice it.
Yeah. Or I mean, it's like only takes you so far. You're left to say. So they develop. You name it. They're into how can we innovate? Right. But then coming back to the Basque Country, that notion of, I mean, Fred and people talk about how much where things like Mondragon University came from, with the colleges and the education part which was linked to R&D to put that in a Basque, telling me about how much, I think it's something like 300 million euros that the Basque government puts into R&D across the region. And then I met a social services cooperative, wasn't part of Mondragon, but they were, and I found this really unusual, within Wales, where does social services R&D happen? And I was struggling. So there are some little places, mostly in the universities, but this was an organisation of 400 people.
Wow.
Yeah, providing adult social care, basically,
right.
But had an R&D department.
Right.
And you looked at that and they were rattling through all the things they'd done. So there was this kind of physical stuff, fine, that you were expecting that. And there's some other stuff about, they were working on digital work, about apps for helping carers of people with dementia. And you looked at some of the funding was coming through a Basque government group, but they created the mechanism to allow that to happen. So there's 300 million, whatever the Basque government is spending, is into a very fertile ploughed field, as Andy Middleman might say, of someone who can actually do something with that. And they had the scale to operate at a European level in the European Living Labs, which I kind of didn't know about as well. Sending a message to my mate who works in social care in England, says, oh yeah, I'm aware of them, but we don't, there's not much connection with them at a European level. But it was that sort of real hard focus. So a co-op of working in social care the members had voted enough money to say, we'll put a chunk of what would otherwise be, in theory, coming back as our salaries into R&D, because we see that as important. And that kind of stood out to me as, actually, you want examples? They are people who take it seriously. I think there's a compass almost in the Basque Country, the points of innovation. That is sort of, where does it go in? And I went even from the historic stuff. You go down river to Portugalete and the bridge, and people say we were the best innovators in the world. And even the little museum about industrial history says we're all about innovation. You almost can't escape the word. So
we need a bit of that.
Yeah.
Chris, we're drawing to the end of the recorded bit. What were your key messages? What would you like us? What are your takeaways? That we should take away?
I think there's some of the technical stuff we should be able to do.
Right.
We can do this.
Just get on with it.
We can do some of the technical if we want to, and it needs, I've got no power and influence, but I know people who have, and they kind of need to, some of that is set fire and do some of these things. Then there's sort of tackling some of the emotional side of stuff as well. There's some of the stories we tell us about it, but actually using some of the experts around behaviour change to think about how some of that stuff's conveyed. People spend enough money on making us buy products we don't want, actually changing our narrative, so use some of that behaviour change stuff. And then taking us sort of think about, this is a complex area, manage for emergence, but the bit I'd say is, this is kind of, some of this is within our grasp. Coming right back to the thing I think that featured in all these organisations is heart, and there's a bit more sort of, I'm trying to remember the Basque word for heart, which is Biotza. We need a bit of hoil.
Bit of hoil.
Yeah.
That's a good way to finish. Bit of hoil. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. You've drafted your report, haven't you? And you plan to share it?
Yes.
When are you expecting to do that, and how can people get hold of it?
I had it marked on Friday. It's got to be a second marking next week, but we have to take some. But then it goes off to the. I mean, if someone wants it and they're really interested, they can have it in draft. because it's getting better the more people that look at it.
There we are, cooperative approach to
Yeah,
drafting.
yeah. It's a not.
Great. Okay. Now it's time to open it out to questions. So, does anyone want to ask a question of Chris? And as if by magic, there may be some questions. Oh wow! Where do we start? They keep moving. Choose one, Chris. That you.
How do I safely Google the word Basque?
Chris, can I say that one bottom right? Why is Audit Office talking about this?
Why?
Good point.
Good
Why
point.
on earth are you talking about this?
Why? Interest. I mean, I think that amongst. I think that there's one phrase. Well, let me get this right. Future Generations Act has got a big bid in about we want a more prosperous Wales, but we want to tackle inequality. And I think from what I've seen around the way, particularly in the Basque Country, all of the social economy, the cooperatives work, the inequality is being tackled. And if we look serious about one of the areas of the Future Generations Act, because if you tackle that, in theory, if you've got less inequality, you haven't got people at the bottom who are in poverty, who are all sorts of other troubles. And in theory, there's less sort of public expenditure in that area. So as an organisation, this is very logical, as an organisation that is interested in how the public pound is spent, which is ever shrinking, there's better value for money by tackling inequality. And I think there's cooperatives, the social economy, have got a big impact on reducing that. And some of the figures from the Basque Country around inequality is certainly far better. The Gini index, which measures inequality, your scores are far better than ours. I can't find them for Wales. We couldn't find them for Wales, but certainly compared, that you don't see that. So I think that's why, as an audit office, we'd be interesting, because there's a sort of logical path: less inequality, a less impact on public expenditure, and in an ever compressing world of that, this sort of jaws of doom graph that the Auditor General talks about, where there's less and less and greater demand.
Yeah.
How do you shift that? I mean, it fits in. There was never any intention to do this. Just Ina said this fits right into our area of interest.
Great. We did some work with a cooperative lawyer called Cliff Mills, or he did the work, and he mapped co-op values and principles across to the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act, and the mapping across. There was so much synergy between the two. You know, if you want to deliver on the Future Generations and Wellbeing Act and the wellbeing goals as a public sector, you have to be looking at cooperatives and supporting more cooperatives, because there's so much linkage.
Yeah, the 5 ways of working.
That's it, exactly.
And the 7 cooperative.
Dovetail so well.
Well,
yeah. Any questions in the room? Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That was great. I was really interested about the concept of connectivity,
Mm-hmm.
and I was sort of sitting here thinking, so how do we do connectivity in Wales? What is it that we do? And it sort of struck me that what we do is the business clubs. One way we do it, and the other way is we do it through regional partnership boards and infrastructure networks, and they're very rigid. You know, if you think about a regional partnership board or a public service board, how is that really helping connectivity? And I was thinking, well, so how do we do that? How do we build spaces, physical and cyber and metaphorical spaces, for people to connect, to build relationships? Because it's not, at the moment, in public policy, we do it through formal systems. And it seems to me that that is not meeting the aspirations that you spoke about. I'm sure they meet some things, but not those ones.
Okay.
Oh, it was Christalis of the Clears.
Thank you, Christal. This is my own view,
Yeah.
and I think that connectivity and knowledge transfer happens through social connections.
Yeah.
And I think what we have to do is enhance enable those spaces where the social connections can work. And I kind of perhaps not very eloquently described some of how those work, but it's classic networks of people, and a great big sort of structural thing probably isn't going to work.
Yeah.
And almost the epitome of that working was for me getting a message saying, you've got this, how are you going to make it work? And I'm ringing around people. So I literally, there's Andy, there's Charlotte. I'm picking up those things, and where those come from is not just, it's through time and trust, and how you build those. And sometimes, you know, I won't speak to Charlotte for 6 months. You pick up the phone and she'll answer it, and you get what you want. And or not what you want, sorry, that's wrong. But we have, but you get an instant answer, and it links you to somewhere else. And I think those bits about the social, building those social networks. Sorry, I'm gonna. Yeah, I don't, and that's not. It's not structural. It's not creating an all Wales connectivity agency.
No, exactly. So that's when I don't know how do we link that to cultural change?
Someone's going to answer that behind you.
Anne, do you want to come in on this point?
Do you mind? Yeah, my name's Anne Collis. I'm part of Barod, and I'm also a Bangor University sociology PhD student. I was just going to say that when we were starting Barod, which is a cooperative, the place that we managed to find the informal connections with other like-minded people was actually when we hooked up with IndieCube for the first time, because we found that whenever it's a network of co-working spaces, so it's not formally set up, as far as I know.
It is a co-op, yes.
Oh, sorry, yeah, it is a co-op, but it's not formally set up to provide the infrastructure for the connectivity. But I've yet to go into an IndieCube for one day to do my work and not walked out without. I mean, last time I walked out knowing about a fantastic phone system that we could hook into. So instead of having to use our personal mobiles, it would all go to a landline and come straight to us. So all that kind of thing.
Yes,
IndieCube is a brilliant one.
And there are 20 or 30 IndieCubes, I think, across Wales at the moment, maybe even more. They're springing up all over the place. Mark's just left, actually, from IndieCube. But,
very good. But that's where I'd look for the start of connectivity.
Marco.
Yeah, it's interesting you say, you know, the public service boards, etc. Because I see those often as mechanisms of control.
Yeah.
They're not anything to do with opening up anything. In fact, they're completely the opposite. So, in a sense, and I feel a lot of authorities are actually stopping things happening because they're too worried about new things that will spring up that can not be controlled. So you then create mechanisms of control, including these highfalutin service boards that's supposed to find out what people need and want, don't really get close to it, don't really actually know, and don't actually get close to the solutions. So I think the question of how would you get to that situation where you move those away, which are absolutely just wasted money and time, to something that actually has some effect.
Thank you, Marco. It's a good point. Let's take a point from the screen. I saw one that's disappeared now, but what would be the big fish you chased after, in your view, Chris, if you were promoting, where is it? There it is. What would be the big fish that you'd recommend Wales chased after, assuming we could nail the cooperative platform to do it? Would it be in the health arena, big five consultancies, social care?
Right.
Is that a fair question?
I just think, I mean, I think, sorry, there's one about social care. I think something like, there's a platform, if you like, through Cartrefi. So there's big at the moment, but it's something like Cartrefi, the umbrella that lots of the little fish could nest under at the moment, if that's some fish nesting is the right. But is that something that would allow lots of these small ones to gather together, a bit like the Cymru Bro have brought 13 together? And is there a role there that what the Wales Co-op Centre does is see these emerging possibilities and help nurture them, so they jump to the next bit where they're a bit more, you know, their stage might be 13 might be enough for Cymru Bro for what they do, but actually getting them into space where they can then negotiate for work or activity that makes them far more financially sustainable.
Yeah,
I think there is something
in there. I think if I was to be critical about what we do at the Wales Co-operative Centre, I think, you know, the team do brilliant work in terms of helping people to set up co-ops and or, you know, to help them to grow within the parameters of the funding, and then it's off you go. You know, there's less connection there in terms of, or less signposting perhaps to, you know, why didn't you go off and connect with, you know, the Cartrefi Cymru family of social care co-ops, for example. So I think that, you know, there's probably a lot in doing more of that, isn't there?
There's something in education, and adult education is mentioned there, is really important. but I think there's kind of that level education, and the Icastola model of schools being far more cooperative in how they behave. I think this, because that brings your next generations on. And in the short term, I think there's something about this financial competency that that people go through. And I'm looking at my director, who is in the world of the Chartered Institute of Public Finance Accountants, and how many people who get their finance qualifications have qualifications that lead them back to being able to provide financial competency within a cooperative or a social economy model. And I think there's something, I don't know is the short answer, but it's kind of, I'm just throwing that in that. Sorry, you're in my line of sight, Steve. And I don't expect you to answer it, but I think there's something. Yeah, but I don't know. But I think that places like Cartrefi have just recruited a new director in, a high caliber financial director, and where do those people come in? That we train people here, that Wales Audit Office, that go out then into the wider public sector world. How many of those go straight into traditional organisations? How many of them might say, actually, I want to go and work for a co-op because that fits with my values? And I bet people, you know, people have chosen from the Basque Country to go and work in that environment because it fits with their values.
Well, it goes back to this point, they wouldn't probably know where, if one hit them in the face potentially. Yeah. I mean, we had a group of us go to the Social Enterprise UK World Forum. So Social Enterprise World Forum, not Social Enterprise UK, in Edinburgh. And in Scotland, not too far from here in terms of culture and geographically and so forth, for the last 10 years, I think, the Scottish government said every school in Scotland will have a social enterprise. We want a social enterprise in every school in Scotland. And this is little ones right to the older ones. And they came and presented and talked about what they were doing. And it was fantastic. You know, incredible to see that happening. And then these school children will leave school and hopefully think about a social enterprise career or a co-op career. Yeah. Right, another question, Chris.
Big five. Okay. It was.
So we missed one.
Radical change. We're just too safe. And those great were brought in too quickly. I think that'd be an alternative business. Yeah, drop the alternative business.
Yeah, make it the mainstream.
This is and I say the notion of, I don't know, is there such a thing nowadays as careers advisors in school?
I think so. Yeah.
I mean, do they have any? What are they? Well, perhaps it's not just going there. So.
I think it's. I'm coming at this. I'm doing a lot of work on automation at the moment, and you know, it's quite clear that we have no idea what the occupations of the future are. And yet, we have careers advisors who are suggesting that a career, as if there's one career for 40 years, is a thing anymore. I think that what the question I would ask is there any way of thinking about how co-ops can help respond to the pressures of automation? Because if your first objective is to protect jobs for your members, as opposed to protect the bottom line, that gives you a very different response to the pressures of automation and AI and algorithms, isn't it? In terms of finding solutions for delivering services, which would then, as a byproduct, keep the money locally and keep people employed. Oh, I'm Calvin Jones, by the way, from Business School in Cardiff.
We all knew.
Cheers, Ina. There's Ina from the enforcement squad.
On that question, are we still live?
We are. Carry on. We've got 4 more minutes.
Can I just say, on that question of how do we think about the jobs of the future, and industry 4.0 is the word, isn't it? Yes, I'm looking at in Guriak. That's really important to you, isn't it? And you were thinking about that. So there are organisations in the Basque Country that are doing it. I think Mondragon Team Academy is, you don't know what the future is. We don't, but you've basically set. How many people across the 600 per year is there across all of the team academies? Yes, so 600 people doing things that the future might emerge from. And I think some of that, a complex system, we don't know what's going to emerge, but we've got to look in and see what it might be. I think there's some of that. I think there's the stuff that fits in. Your R&D department's grown from
6 to 43 just in 4 years.
43 people in a company that are kind of really, you know, laser sharp, kind of looking at what they do. And I think, I don't know where that happens.
What's your company, just so people know?
Gureak.
Yes, and just explain what they...
Okay, it's a non-profit private company whose mission is create and adapt or create job opportunities for people with disability.
Yeah.
And they're quite good at it. They're very good at it. But I mean, you've run for 40 years.
43 years. So we have nowadays a workforce over 6,000 people, representing almost the 2% of the active population of the province of Guipúzcoa. And the 82% of our workforce is people with disability. And our self-financing rate is the 81%. So we don't depend on public funding.
No, just for a small amount.
Same.
And but you're not a co-op though, quite?
No, we are not. No, because the 82% of our workforce is people with disability. So it will be quite difficult, you know, for the day if people with intellectual disability will be like cooperative, like part of the company. It will be possible, but it will make it like a little bit difficult to make decisions and to you know, to...
But you might look at stakeholder arrangements or something.
Yeah, that's it.
But I mean, that as an example, that 43 people now in a organisation focused on what is the future, and Industry 4.0 is a phrase that I hadn't heard until I went to the Basque Country. So people, and it fits in this idea of what's the future hold. But I say, coming back to Team Academy, that's almost like, in my view, the ultimate complex system must manage for emergence. What's going to come out of it? One of you know, someone amongst Team Academy, all of the people is going to have the next big Mondragon company, maybe.
Hopefully,
yeah. Right, one more question, Chris, and then we are good to go. Where can we see? It moves too quickly, this. I often find many miss the vital point that co-ops are beyond co-production and well-being. What can be done to transform
information is power, governance is control?
Yeah. We've sort of touched on that bit, haven't we?
As democratic member control,
involvement,
worker involvement. That's some of the key to this, and that's not inconsistent with lots of stuff around what's a good management model in any organisation. And we're moving to that in other areas, but actually, as a core principle of how you organise yourself, it's got to be a better way. Information is not, and power, governance is control. Well, there's not potentially a great future ahead for an organisation like that.
Chris, we've come to the end now. Thank you very much for sharing your learning. I think if we could send, I don't know, hundreds of people off on this Winston Churchill Fellowship every year to learn about co-ops, we would transform the country, because you've come back passionate about co-ops, having known nothing to begin with. So thank you for sharing, but also your energy and the way you're communicating it more broadly is helping those of us in the social economy to get the message out and do more, and also reflect on what we might be doing better. So thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you.